The glass tower was falling, and I was the only one who knew it yet. My name, the only name I had ever answered to, was Talus. I was 13 years old by the count of a lira, sitting in the third row of my study hall with an unfinished sheet of number problems in front of me, when the floor shivered under my feet like something enormous had exhaled beneath it. Nobody else looked up. Dovey, my younger foster brother, kept chewing the end of his stylus. Our teacher, a soft-spoken Voss elder named Wren, kept talking about the harmony of prime sequences, as if the whole building had not just told me, in a language older than words, that it intended to come apart. I stood up before I decided to stand up. That was always the strange part, the part I never told anyone. My body moved first, and asked my permission after. My chair scraped back. My eyes had already found the door, the window, the gap in the far wall where a maintenance hatch sat, painted over so many times that most people forgot it was there. I did not forget. I never forgot exits. It was as if some old, patient part of me had walked into every room I had ever entered and quietly filed away every way out, long before my conscious mind cared to ask why. "Talus," Wren said, mildly surprised, the way you would be surprised by a student standing up during a lecture on manners. Not the way you would be surprised by danger. The Voss did not have a place in their minds for danger. Their whole society had grown up soft and round like river stones, worn smooth by centuries without violence, without predators, without war. They trusted each other completely, mind to mind, in a way I had never learned to do, because some part of me did not trust anything that easily. "Everyone needs to move to the hall," I said. My voice came out flat and quick, not like a frightened child's voice at all. A few of my classmates blinked at me. Dovey actually laughed, a small huff of amusement, the kind you give when your slow, awkward foster sister says something odd again. Then the ceiling groaned. It was not loud. That was the frightening part. It was a low, tired sound, like an old tree deciding, after 100 years of standing, to finally lie down. A fine rain of white dust sifted from a crack near the light fixture. Wren's calm expression did not change immediately, because the Voss read danger through each other's minds, through the panic of the herd, and no one around them was panicking yet. They were not built to notice a threat before the room agreed it was a threat. I was. I did not wait for them to agree. I do not remember deciding to move. I remember being already moving, my hand fastened around Dovey's wrist, dragging him out of his chair with a strength that made his eyes go wide, because I was not supposed to be strong. Everyone always said how delicate I was, how careful they had to be with me, how I bruised if a Voss child so much as bumped me during a game. And yet here I was, hauling my foster brother upright like he weighed nothing at all. "Move," I said to the room, louder this time, and something in the tone finally cracked through their calm, because the Voss might not sense danger quickly, but once someone shows real fear, real command, it spreads through their linked minds like fire along a fuse. Wren's expression shifted. The children began to rise. We were 11 steps from the door when the ceiling came down. I want to explain what happened in those 2 seconds, because I have turned them over in my memory 1,000 times since, and I still do not fully understand where the knowledge came from. I saw the crack spread before it spread. I saw, the way you see the whole shape of a falling glass before it shatters, exactly where the panel above us would break, and exactly which way the debris would fall. I planted my feet, put both hands on Dovey's shoulders, and shoved him forward into the doorway a half-second before a slab of ceiling the size of a table crashed down exactly where he had been standing. Then I turned, caught Wren's sleeve, and pulled the old teacher sideways out of the path of a second falling section, my feet finding gaps in the tumbling dust and broken struts as if I had walked this exact collapse before in a dream. Somewhere behind me, a support beam screamed as it bent. I did not look at it. I did not need to. I already knew which way it would fall, and I was already 3 steps clear of it. We spilled out into the hall together, coughing, pale with dust, and behind us, the study hall finished its collapse with a long, grinding roar that shook loose plaster from the corridor ceiling, too. For a moment, nobody spoke. Wren stared at the wreckage, then at me, then at the perfectly straight, unbroken shape of every single student standing in the hallway. Not one child hurt, not one bruise. Dovey was staring at me the way you stare at a stranger, wearing your sister's face. "How did you know?" Ren said quietly, "exactly where it would fall?" I opened my mouth to answer and found, with a small cold jolt, that I did not have an answer. I had not thought about angles or velocity or the weight of falling stone. I had simply known, the way you know to blink when something flies at your eyes. It had never once felt like thinking. It had felt like memory, but I had never seen a building collapse before in my life. "I don't know," I said, and it came out smaller than I meant it to, because for the first time in my whole life, the strangeness of myself frightened me more than the falling ceiling had. By the time the building administrators arrived, the story had already reshaped itself into something everyone could be comfortable with. Talus got lucky. Talus has good instincts. Talus has always been an odd, jumpy little thing, always flinching at loud sounds, always sleeping with her back to the wall, and I suppose all that jumpiness finally paid off for once. They patted my head. They praised me gently, the way you praise a small animal for doing an unexpected trick. Nobody asked the real question, which was not "how did you know," but "why do you, alone among every gentle child on this gentle world, know how to move through falling stone, like it is a language you were born speaking?" Marin, my foster mother, arrived at the school an hour later, her face carefully smoothed into the calm every Voss parent wore in public, but her eyes found mine and did not let go the entire walk home. She held my hand more tightly than usual. She kept glancing sideways at me, quick little looks, as if checking that I was still the same shape as before. I had seen that look on her face only a few times in my life, always right after I did something a little too fast, a little too precise, a little too unafraid. We lived in a house built into the soft green slope above the river, all round windows and low ceilings, the kind of home the Voss built because they liked to feel close to the sky and the water at once. Dovey ran ahead of us the moment we arrived, eager to tell our youngest foster sibling, little Pell, the whole story of the collapsing hall, growing more dramatic with every retelling until, by dinner, I had apparently caught the entire ceiling with my bare hands. I sat at the table that evening with my number problems still unfinished in my bag, my braid half undone from the dust and the running, and I picked at my food while Marin watched me with that same careful, quiet worry. "You're shaking," she said gently, reaching over to still my hand on the table. I looked down and realized she was right. My hands were trembling, but not, I understood slowly, from fear. My pulse had not raced during the collapse. If anything, it had slowed, gone steady and cold and clear, the way still water goes clear right before a storm. It was only now, safe at the table, surrounded by warm light and the smell of familiar food, that my body had decided to catch up with what had happened, and even then, it trembled not with fright, but with something I did not yet have a name for, a kind of hunger for the moment to happen again, so I could do it perfectly a second time. That thought scared me more than anything else that day. "I'm fine," I said, because that was the answer everyone wanted, and I was very good, even then, at giving people the answer they wanted, instead of the truth. Marin did not believe me. I could tell by the way her hand lingered on mine a moment too long, by the small furrow that appeared and disappeared between her brows, gone before Dovey or Pell could notice it. She had looked at me that way since I was very small, since before I had any memory of my own, the first uneasy look of a mother who loves a child completely and yet cannot quite explain, even to herself, the shiver she feels sometimes when that child goes very still and very quiet in a room. That night I lay awake long after the house had gone dark, listening to the river outside my window and doing what I always did on nights like this. I traced the shape of my room in my mind. Door, 12 steps. Window, 7 steps, second floor drop, survivable. Shelf that could be pulled down and used to block the door. I had done this every single night for as long as I could remember, without ever once wondering why, the same way you do not wonder why you breathe. It was only lying there, staring at the dark ceiling, that had almost fallen on me twice that day, once in stone and once in memory, that I let myself ask the question properly, for what felt like the first time in my life. Why do I know how to survive things I have never survived before? I did not have an answer. I only had the trembling in my hands, the coldness in my chest where fear should have been, and the small, sharp, terrible certainty that somewhere underneath the girl who was bad at braiding her own hair and worse at finishing her homework on time, there was something else entirely, something that had been waiting, very patiently, for the ceiling to fall. I fell asleep still holding that question, and somewhere in the dark hours before morning, I dreamed, as I sometimes did, of fire and a woman's voice singing something fierce and low, in words I did not understand, pressing something small and hard into my infant hand, and telling me, over and over, in a language I had never learned and somehow already knew, to run. The dream never left me all the way, not even after I woke. For 3 days after the collapse, I tried very hard to be ordinary again. I finished my number problems, even the ones I usually left for the last minute. I sat with Dovey and Pell in the evenings while Marin told us stories about the old rivers of Illyria, and I laughed at Dovey's terrible jokes, and I let myself believe that the strange coldness in my chest during the collapse had been nothing more than a frightened child's body doing something odd for one bad afternoon. It was the braiding that gave me away first, the way it always did. Every Voss child learned to braid before they learned to read, because among my adopted people, hair was a kind of language. A tight, simple braid meant you wanted to be left alone to think. A loose, decorated braid meant you were open to company, to games, to gentle teasing. Complicated braids with woven threads meant celebration, or grief, or apology, depending on the color of the thread. It was a soft, patient art, and I had never once managed to learn it properly, no matter how many patient afternoons Marin spent guiding my clumsy fingers through the strands. That evening, sitting by the window with a comb in my lap and my own hair a tangled mess around my shoulders, I finally lost my patience with myself. "I don't understand why I can't do this," I said, more sharply than I meant to, throwing the comb down onto the little table beside me. Dovey could do a full celebration braid before he could walk properly. Pell can do one with her eyes closed. I've had years of practice and I still can't manage a simple morning braid. Marin looked up from the shirt she was mending, and something soft moved behind her eyes. "Some things take some people longer," she said gently. "It doesn't mean anything is wrong with you." "Doesn't it though?" I said, quieter now, looking down at my own hands. They were strong hands, stronger than they had any right to be for a girl everyone called delicate. They could catch a falling ceiling section and shove a boy twice my size out of its path without a wasted motion. They could not, apparently, weave 3 strands of hair into a simple pattern without turning it into a knot. I did not say the rest of the thought out loud, but it sat heavy in my chest anyway. My hands were good at things no one had ever taught me, and useless at things everyone else learned before they could walk. It was as if I had been built for an entirely different kind of life, and only borrowed, uneasily, into this gentle one. That night, the dream came again, sharper this time. I was very small in the dream, small enough to be held in one arm, and everything around me was moving too fast, shaking, roaring. There was heat on one side of my face, and cold wind on the other, and somewhere above me a woman's voice, rough with smoke, saying low words I still did not understand, though something in me strained toward them the way you strain toward a language you knew before you could speak, and then forgot. Her arms were tight around me. Something metal and small was pressed into my tiny fist, and I remember, even now, the exact shape of it, a flat disc with rounded edges, warm from her skin. "Run," she said, in that same voice, the only word from the dream I had ever managed to hold on to after waking, spoken with such aching tenderness that even now, years later, it made my throat tighten to remember it. Then the dream, as it always did, ended in fire and falling, and I woke gasping, one hand already closed tight around nothing at all. I lay there afterward for a long while, staring at the ceiling, my heart slow and steady, in a way that felt wrong for someone who had just woken from something so frightening. I noticed, not for the first time, that fear never seemed to move through me the way it moved through Dovey or Pell, who would come running to Marin's room after even a small nightmare, breathless and trembling. My fear went the other direction. It made everything around me sharper, slower, clearer, the way the whole world sometimes goes very quiet and very bright in the second before something happens. I had never told anyone about the dream. I am not sure why, except that some deep, old instinct in me had always understood, without being told, that certain things are safer kept hidden. The next morning, I found Marin sitting alone at the kitchen table before the rest of the house had woken, a small wooden box open in front of her that I had never seen before. She startled when I came in, closing the lid quickly, though not quickly enough. "You're up early," she said, her voice a touch too bright. "So are you," I said, looking at the box. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then Marin sighed, the way adults sigh when they have decided, reluctantly, to stop pretending. "Sit down, Talus," she said. I sat. She opened the box again, slowly, and inside I saw a scrap of dark, burned fabric, edges melted and blackened, with a shape stitched into it that I did not recognize but somehow still felt was familiar, the way the woman's song in my dream felt familiar. There was a small metal disc as well, dented and scorched on one side, and looking at it, my chest went tight and cold, because it was the exact shape of the thing pressed into my hand in the dream. "This was in the wreckage of the ship you came to us in," Marin said quietly. "The ship you were found in, when you were still small enough to fit in my two hands. We never knew where it came from. Not really. Our scholars said it wasn't built by anyone in our part of the sky. We kept these two pieces, because they were the only things not too damaged to keep, and because I always thought that one day, when you were ready, you might want to see them." I reached out and touched the burned fabric with one finger, and something in me, some patient, waiting thing, recognized the shape stitched into it, even though I had never in my conscious memory seen anything like it before. "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Marin admitted. "I only know that whoever put you into that ship loved you enough to send you very far away from wherever you came from, and that they must have believed, more than anything, that you needed to survive." I sat with that for a long moment, the metal disc warm now from my own hand instead of hers, and felt, for the first time in my life, the shape of a question so large I did not know how to hold it. Who was I, before I was Talus? Marin watched me carefully, the same worry from the collapse still living behind her eyes, mixed now with something gentler, something like grief, for a story she did not know how to finish for me. "I've always loved you exactly as you are," she said softly. "Whatever you find, whatever you were before you were ours, none of that changes what you are to this family now." I wanted to believe her completely. Part of me did. But another part of me, the part that had shoved Dovey out of the path of falling stone without a single wasted thought, the part that mapped every exit in every room without meaning to, the part that went cold and clear instead of frightened, was already turning the metal disc over and over between my fingers, searching for a catch, a seam, anything that might open it and tell me the truth. I found nothing that morning. It would be many months before I found anything at all. In the meantime, life did what life does, and pulled me back into its ordinary rhythm. There were more number problems, more evenings by the river, more clumsy attempts at braiding that made Dovey laugh so hard he nearly fell off his chair, more small warm dinners with Marin and Pell that made it easy, for whole stretches of time, to forget the box and the question sitting inside it. But certain things had already changed, quietly, underneath the surface of my days. I began to notice, in a way I never had before, how strange my own reflexes truly were. When Dovey threw a ball at me too hard during a game in the yard, my hand closed around it out of the air before my mind had even registered it was coming, and I saw, in the half-second before I caught it, exactly how it would spin, and exactly where it would land if I let it go, the way I had seen the falling ceiling. When a loud crack of thunder split the sky one evening, every other child in the yard flinched and cried out, while I had already turned, calm and quick, to find the nearest solid shelter, before the sound had even finished rolling across the hills. I began keeping a small notebook, hidden under my mattress, where I wrote down every strange thing I noticed about myself, in careful, private handwriting no one else ever saw. The way my heartbeat slowed instead of raced. The way I always slept facing the door. The way certain foods, plain and mild to everyone else, tasted flat and wrong to me, while other things, sharp and strong, that made Dovey wrinkle his nose, tasted exactly right. The way I sometimes woke in the middle of the night certain, with no evidence at all, that someone was standing just outside my window, and was, more than once, correct. I did not show the notebook to anyone. I told myself it was because I did not want to worry Marin further. The truer reason, the one I only barely admitted to myself late at night, was that some old, careful part of me understood that information like this was valuable, and that valuable things were safer kept close and quiet, shown to no one until you were certain it was safe to show them. It was around this time that Yara, the eldest of the settlement's mind elders, a Voss woman so old her braid had gone the pale silver blue of late winter sky, began to visit our house more often than she ever had before. At first her visits seemed ordinary enough. She would sit with Marin over tea, speaking softly of settlement matters, of harvests and festivals and small disputes between neighboring families. But I noticed, the way I noticed everything now, that her eyes found me every time I entered the room, and lingered there a beat too long, the way Marin's did, only colder, more measuring, as though she were reading something written on the inside of my skin that the rest of the household could not see. One evening, she asked to walk with me alone along the river path, and Marin, after a brief, unreadable look passed between the two women, agreed. The evening air was soft and cool, the river running low and silver in the fading light, and for a long while Yara said nothing at all, simply walking beside me with her hands folded into her wide sleeves. I found, strangely, that her silence did not make me uneasy the way silence with most people did. It felt, instead, oddly familiar, the silence of someone who had learned, long ago, to watch first and speak only when watching was no longer enough. "You do not sleep the way the rest of the young ones do," she said finally, without preamble. I said nothing, unsure whether this was an accusation or simply an observation. "You do not fear the way we fear," she went on, her pale eyes fixed on the river rather than on me, which somehow made the words land harder. When the hall fell, I felt it in the minds of every child in that building, all at once, a bright hot wave of terror rolling through the settlement's shared thought, before anyone even understood what had happened. Every mind but yours, Talus. Yours went quiet. Yours went still and clear and sharp, like a knife laid down on stone. My mouth had gone dry. "Is that bad?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Yara was quiet for a long moment before she answered. "It is not bad," she said at last, "but it is not us. Whatever you are, child, you did not come from a world that grew soft and gentle the way ours did. You came from somewhere that taught its children to go still and clear when the world fell in on them, because that is the only way to live long enough to see the next morning. I do not know what that world was, but I have lived a very long time, and I have never felt a mind like yours before, not in all my years among my own people." We walked in silence after that, the river murmuring beside us, and I found, to my own surprise, that I was not afraid of what she had said. I was, instead, filled with a strange, aching relief, the relief of finally hearing someone name a thing you have felt alone with for your entire life. "Do you think I'm dangerous?" I asked finally, very quietly. Yara stopped walking and turned to face me fully, her pale eyes steady on mine. "I think," she said, "that you are exactly what this soft, gentle world of ours has never needed, right up until the day it desperately does. And I think, when that day comes, you will not be the fragile child everyone believes you to be. You will be the reason the rest of us are still standing." I did not understand, that evening, how soon that day would come. I only knew, walking home beside her, in the deepening dark, that something inside me had shifted quietly into place, like a key finally finding the lock it was always meant for, and that whatever waited for me, at the end of this strange, unanswered question of who I truly was, I would not be able to stay the ordinary, homework-forgetting, badly braided girl much longer. The alarms over the settlement had never once sounded in my entire life, and when they finally did, 3 weeks after my walk with Yara, I understood within the first 2 seconds that they were not a drill. It was midday, and I was in the yard with Dovey and Pell, half-heartedly practicing a braid pattern Marin had shown me for the 10th time, when the long, rising wail of the settlement horn rolled down from the hill tower and washed over the whole valley. Every Voss within hearing distance froze at once, their linked minds catching the shared jolt of alarm and passing it instantly from person to person, a wave of fear breaking over the settlement altogether, the way it always did. I did not freeze. I was already moving before the second note of the horn finished sounding, already pulling Pell up from the grass by her arm, already scanning the tree line at the edge of our yard, because some old, patient part of me had noticed, half a breath before the horn even began, that the birds had gone silent, in a way birds only go silent when something large and dangerous is moving beneath them. "Inside," I said to Dovey, my voice cutting through his frozen shock. "Now." He obeyed without arguing, something he almost never did, and I understood, distantly, that some part of him recognized the same tone in my voice that had gotten us all out of the collapsing hall. Marin came running from the garden, her face pale, and for one terrible moment I saw real fear in her eyes, the deep, helpless fear of someone whose entire species had never once needed to learn how to fight. "Raiders," she said, breathless, gripping the doorframe. "The tower says raiders, coming down from the eastern ridge. We haven't had raiders on Allura in 3 generations. Nobody knows what to do." I looked past her, out toward the ridge, and felt something in my chest go very cold and very still, the same coldness that had come over me during the collapse, except deeper now, older, as if some sleeping animal inside me had finally opened its eyes all the way. "I know what to do," I heard myself say, and even as the words left my mouth, I did not fully understand where they were coming from. The raiders came down out of the tree line an hour later, and the moment I saw them, I understood, with a clarity that frightened me more than the raiders themselves, that these were not Voss, and not anything like the Voss. They moved low and fast, in loose spreading lines, using the terrain the way something born to hunt uses terrain, and where the Voss below them scattered in blind linked panic, the raiders moved with the calm, patient confidence of creatures who had done this many times before, on many soft, gentle worlds just like this one. They called themselves, I would learn later, the Ashgrowl, though in that first terrible hour I knew them only as shapes, cutting through the settlement's outer fields, armed with weapons crude enough to be brutal and effective, herding fleeing families toward the river the way you herd animals toward a narrow gate. Marin tried to gather us into the house's storm cellar, the deep stone room built for weather, never for anything like this, and for a moment I let her, crouching in the dark with Dovey's hand crushed tight in mine, and Pell shaking silently against my side. But even in the dark, even with my own heart beating slow and steady in a way that felt wrong for the moment, I could hear it. The screaming carried down from the hill path above the river, high and thin, and full of a fear the Voss had never needed a name for before today. "They're taking people toward the water crossing," I said quietly, more to myself than to Marin. "Talus, stay down," Marin whispered, gripping my arm. I looked at her in the dim cellar light, at the same fear I had seen in her eyes since I was small, the fear of a mother who loved a strange child completely and had never understood, until this exact moment, exactly what that child might be for. "I can help them," I said. "You are 13, she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You are a child." "I don't think I am," I said, and I meant it more honestly than I had ever meant anything in my life. "Not the way you mean it. I think I was built for exactly this, and I think if I stay down here, people are going to die who don't have to." I did not wait for her to argue further. I slipped out through the cellar's low side vent, out into the smoke-hazed afternoon light, and the moment my feet touched open ground, something inside me settled into place, the way a blade settles into a well-made handle. I will try, even now, to describe what happened next as honestly as I can, because I have turned it over so many times since, searching for the exact border between the frightened, homework-forgetting girl I had always believed myself to be, and whatever it was that took over my body along the river path that afternoon. I moved low, the way the raiders moved, without ever having been taught to. I used the tree line for cover the way they did, staying low against the slope where the long grass hid my shape, tracking the sound of a struggling group of Voss children being pushed toward the water by two raiders with crude energy prods. I did not run at them. I did not shout. I watched first, the way Yara had once told me she had learned to watch, counting their steps, their spacing, the angle of their weapons, the exact moment their attention would be split between the fleeing children and the terrain around them. Then I moved. I do not remember deciding to close the distance. I remember being suddenly, silently, among them, catching the nearer raider's weapon arm and turning it aside before he had even registered another presence beside him, using his own momentum to put him hard into the ground in a way that left him stunned, but breathing, because some part of me, even in that terrible clarity, had already decided, without discussion, that I did not want to kill if I did not have to. The second raider turned, weapon rising, and I was already inside the arc of it, my palm driving up under his wrist, my knee finding the exact soft point below his ribs that dropped all the strength out of his legs at once. Two raiders down in the space of perhaps 4 seconds, and I had not even fully understood, until the children scattered free past me, screaming their thanks in voices too frightened to properly form words, that my hands were shaking now, not with fear, but with something closer to recognition, the way you shake after remembering a language you had forgotten you ever knew. I did not stop there. I could not stop there, because along the river path, I could already hear more screaming, and somewhere underneath that screaming, unmistakably, I heard Marin's voice. I ran, faster than I had ever run in my life, faster, I think, than my body should have been able to carry me, and came around the bend of the river path to find Marin pressed back against the rock wall by the crossing, 3 raiders closing on her, and Dovey and Pell, who must have slipped out of the cellar after me despite everything, standing in front of her with nothing but their small bodies between their foster mother and the weapons rising to meet her. Something in me that had, until that exact moment, still felt like restraint, simply stopped existing. I do not have gentle words for what happened in the next handful of seconds, and I have chosen, deliberately, not to dwell on the details even in my own memory, because some things are better carried as outcome than as picture. I will say only that when it ended, all 3 raiders lay on the ground, disarmed and unable to continue, and that I had not killed a single one of them, though every part of my body had understood, with total and terrible clarity, exactly how easily I could have. Marin stared at me across the fallen raiders, her face white, her hands still spread protectively in front of Dovey and Pell, and for one long, unbearable moment, I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen there before in my entire life. She was afraid of me, not the soft, worried fear she had always carried, the fear of a mother for a strange, fragile child. This was different. This was the fear of someone who had just watched their gentle, homework-forgetting daughter move through violence the way water moves through a broken dam, unstoppable and precise, and entirely, terribly capable, and who understood, in that moment, that everything she had believed about who I was had been, in some fundamental way, incomplete. "Talus," she whispered, and my name in her mouth sounded, for the first time, like a question rather than a certainty. I wanted, more than anything, to go to her, to be held the way I had always been held, to be told that everything was still the same as it had been that morning. But the settlement horn was still sounding somewhere behind us, and I could hear, carried on the wind from further down the valley, the unmistakable sound of more fighting, more screaming, more of the soft, gentle world I had grown up in discovering, all at once, that it had no idea how to survive a day like this one. "I have to go," I said instead, my voice steadier than I felt. "There are more of them near the grain stores. I can hear it." "Talus, please," Marin said, reaching for me, but I was already turning away, already moving down the river path toward the sound of the fighting, because whatever gentle, ordinary girl I had spent 13 years believing myself to be, some older, more patient part of me had woken up completely now, and it did not know how to stand still while people it loved were in danger. What followed, over the next hour, was the longest stretch of my life I have ever lived without once feeling the fear everyone assumes must have been there. I moved through the settlement's outer fields the way I imagine, now, a creature born on a hard world moves through danger, low and quiet and utterly economical, wasting no motion, making no unnecessary sound. I found small groups of Ashgrau raiders, herding frightened Voss families toward the river crossing, and I dismantled their formations one at a time, using the terrain, using their own weapons against them when I could, always choosing, in the small clear space at the center of my mind, to disable, rather than destroy, wherever the choice was mine to make. I was not alone in this for long. Word had spread, carried mind to mind through the Voss's shared thought faster than any voice could carry it, and by the time I reached the grain stores at the heart of the settlement, a handful of the settlement's older Voss, Yara among them, had gathered what courage their gentle people could muster and begun forming a line to protect the youngest children sheltering there. Yara found me at the edge of that gathering, her pale eyes taking in, without any visible shock at all, the state of my hands, my torn clothing, the two remaining raiders I had left disarmed and immobile in the grass behind me. "You were right," I said to her, breathless, my voice cracking slightly for the first time all afternoon. "About what I am. I was right," she agreed simply. "But being right does not make this easy for you, child. I can see that." "I don't know how to feel about what I just did," I admitted, and it was the truest thing I had said all day. Yara reached out and rested one weathered hand against my cheek, an intimacy she had never once offered me before. "Feel whatever you need to feel," she said. "But feel it after. Right now this settlement needs exactly what you are, and there is no shame in being needed." The Ashgrau raiders, it turned out, had not expected real resistance from a world that had gone 3 generations without needing to remember what resistance even looked like. By the time the settlement's small defense militia, hastily armed and badly organized, finally arrived at the grain stores, the worst of the raiding parties had already been turned back, disarmed, or driven off entirely, and much of that turning back, though I would spend a long time afterward struggling to accept it, had happened because of me. When the last of the Ashgrau ships finally lifted off the ridge and disappeared back into the darkening sky, the settlement did not erupt into celebration the way I imagine, now, other worlds might have. It fell, instead, into a long, stunned, uncertain quiet, the quiet of an entire gentle people trying to understand what had just happened to them, and trying, harder still, to understand what it meant that the fragile foster child from the crashed ship had turned out to be the only reason so many of their families were still whole. I stood at the edge of the grain stores as the sun went down, my hands finally beginning to shake in earnest now that there was nothing left to fight, and watched Marin walking toward me across the trampled field, Dovey and Pell close behind her, all 3 of their faces unreadable in the fading light. I did not know, in that moment, whether she was walking toward me to hold me or to finally ask the question that had been sitting unspoken between us for 13 years. I only knew that whatever answer waited on the other side of that walk, the girl who forgot her homework and could never quite manage her own braids, no longer existed in quite the same way she had that morning, and that some deeper, older part of me, the part that had gone quiet and clear and utterly certain in the middle of all that danger, was not entirely sorry to see her go. Marin did not ask the question that evening after all. She simply walked the last distance between us, pulled me into her arms without a single word, and held on so tightly that I felt, For the first time since the horn had sounded that morning, the tight, cold clarity in my chest finally began to loosen. "You saved us," she said quietly into my hair. "All of us." "I frightened you," I said, my voice muffled against her shoulder. "Yes," she admitted, pulling back just enough to look at me properly. "You did. I won't lie to you and say you didn't. But being frightened of what you can do is not the same as being frightened of you, Talus. I want you to understand that difference, because I think it matters more than anything else I could say to you tonight." I wanted, desperately, to believe her completely, and over the days that followed, I came to believe that I mostly did. But something had shifted in the settlement all the same, a quiet undercurrent of awe and unease that followed me now wherever I went. Children who had teased me gently for my clumsy braiding now watched me with wide, careful eyes. Adults who had always spoken to me the way you speak to something fragile now lowered their voices slightly when I passed, the way you lower your voice near something you have only just realized might be listening more closely than you thought. I did not entirely mind it. What I minded, far more, was the question that had followed me home from the river path and refused, ever since, to let me sleep properly. What was I, before I was Talus? It was Yara, in the end, who gave me the answer, though it took the better part of a month, and the help of Alira's few remaining old scholars, the ones who studied fragments of ships and technologies that had drifted into their gentle corner of the sky from worlds far harder than their own. She came to our house on a gray, quiet evening, carrying a small case I did not recognize, and asked Marin's permission, formally and carefully, to sit with me alone. "We finally opened it," she said, once the two of us were settled at the kitchen table, the little case resting between us. "The disk from your ship. It took our scholars this long, only because the technology inside it was never built by anyone from our part of the sky. It is very old, and very simple, in the way that only the most desperate inventions are simple, built by people who did not have the luxury of complicated design." She opened the case, and inside, resting on dark cloth, was the metal disc I remembered from Marin's box. Cleaned now, its dented edge no less scarred, but its surface faintly, impossibly glowing along a thin seam that had not been visible before. "It's a recording," Yara said quietly. "Voice, mostly. A little image data, badly damaged. We believe it was meant to be given to you when you were old enough to understand it. Whoever placed you on that ship intended for you to hear this one day." My hands trembled slightly as I reached for it, and Yara, gently, guided my fingers to the small seam along its edge. "Are you ready?" she asked. I was not entirely certain that I was, but I had spent 13 years being ready for things I did not understand, and I found, in that moment, that I did not want to spend one more day not knowing. "Yes," I said. The recording that played was short, no more than a few minutes, the voice within it cracked and distorted by damage and time, but unmistakably, achingly familiar in a way that made my chest ache before I even understood the words. It was the voice from my dream. "If you're hearing this," the voice said, rough with what I would later understand was exhaustion, and grief, and something else beneath both of those things that I did not yet have a word for, "then it worked. You made it somewhere safe. I don't know where you'll end up, little one. I only know that wherever you land, it has to be safer than here." There was a pause in the recording, filled with a distant, muffled roar that I understood, with a slow, cold certainty, was the sound of something like the fires from my dream. "My name is Ellen," the voice went on. "Ellen Halden. I was a soldier, on a world you will probably never see again, a world that was busy tearing itself apart over things I hope you never have to learn the names of. Water, land, fear. We fought each other so long and so hard that most of us forgot how to do anything else. I want you to know that it wasn't always like that. There were gentler days, once, further back than either of us will ever get to see. I want you to know that we were not always what the last years made us." I sat very still, the disc trembling slightly in my open palm, and listened to my mother's voice, my true mother, a woman I had never consciously known, describe, in broken, exhausted fragments, a world I had somehow already carried inside me my whole life, without ever knowing its name. I used the last of what we had, she went on, to give you something before you go. It isn't magic, it's old training, old conditioning, the kind soldiers used to give themselves back when there was still a difference between soldiers and everyone else. I put it into you the only way I had left, while you were still small enough not to fight it. You'll move like someone who survived worse than you have. You'll know things you were never taught. I am sorry for that, more than I have words to tell you. I did not want to send my daughter away carrying a war inside her instead of a childhood, but I did not have the luxury of choosing between the two. I only had the choice between sending you somewhere safe, with that war folded quietly inside you, or losing you here with nothing at all. There was a long pause, filled again with that distant, terrible roar, closer now. Whatever gentle place you end up in, the voice said, softer now, breaking properly for the first time, let it be gentle for you. Let yourself have the childhood I couldn't give you. But if the day ever comes when that gentleness needs protecting, and I hope with everything left in me that it never does, know that what I put inside you was never meant to make you a weapon. It was only ever meant to make sure you got the chance to choose, one day, what kind of person you wanted to be. I love you. I am so sorry, and I love you, and I would do it again exactly the same way, because it meant you got to live. The recording ended there, cutting off mid-breath, and the kitchen fell into a silence so complete I could hear the river outside the window, the same river that had run past my window every night of my life, without my ever once knowing it ran on a world that was never truly, entirely, mine to begin with. Yara did not speak for a long while, allowing me the silence I needed, and when I finally looked up at her, my face wet in a way I had not fully noticed happening, she simply reached across the table and folded her weathered hand gently over mine. She loved you very much, Yara said softly. That much, at least, needs no scholar to confirm. She gave me a war, I said, my voice thick, instead of a childhood. She gave you both, Yara corrected gently. The war lives quietly in you. Yes, and you felt its weight the day this settlement needed you most. But the childhood is real too, Talus. The braiding you struggle with, the homework you forget, the mother who has loved you since before you could speak, and the brother and sister who have never once, in 13 years, thought of you as anything less than theirs. Both of those things are true about you, at the exact same time. I do not think that makes you broken. I think it makes you rare. I sat with that thought for a long time after Yara left that evening, turning the small metal disc over and over in my hands, feeling its dented edge under my fingers the way I had felt it, apparently, once before, as an infant too small to remember holding it, pressed there by a mother who had loved me enough to send me somewhere she would never get to see, so that I might have the chance to become something other than what her own dying world had needed her to be. Marin found me still sitting there long after the house had gone dark, the disc held loosely in my lap, my face streaked and tired. She did not ask what the recording had said. I think, somehow, she already understood, from the shape of my grief alone, that I had finally found the missing piece of the question that had followed both of us since the day the ceiling first fell. I heard a little, through the door, she admitted quietly, sitting beside me. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. It's all right, I said, and found to my own surprise that I meant it. She sounds like she loved you very much, Marin said carefully. She did, I said. She gave up everything so I could live somewhere gentle. Marin was quiet for a moment, and then, gently, she reached over and took my hand, the same hand that had thrown 2 raiders to the ground without hesitation only weeks before. Then I think, she said softly, that the 2 of us have more in common than either of us realized. 2 mothers, from 2 very different worlds, both of us willing to give up everything so that you could have the chance to choose your own life. I looked up at her then, at the woman who had raised me since before I could remember, who had spent 13 years quietly, patiently afraid of a strangeness in me she had never fully understood, and loved me anyway, every single day, without exception. "I don't know how to be both things at once," I admitted. "The girl who forgets her homework, and the thing that took down 3 raiders without flinching. I don't know how to hold both of those at the same time." Marin considered this for a long moment, watching the dark river outside the window. "I don't think you're meant to choose one over the other," she said finally. "I think you're meant to carry both, the way you'd carry 2 hands instead of one. One hand for the homework, and the braiding, and the ordinary gentle life you deserve. And one hand, quiet and ready, for the day this gentle world needs protecting again. I don't think that makes you 2 different people, Talus. I think it only makes you exactly what your first mother hoped you would become when she sent you here." I did not have an answer for her that night, not a full one, but I sat there a long while longer, the disc still warm in my palm, the river running steady and unbothered outside the window, and felt, for the first time since the horn had first sounded weeks before, something in my chest settle into a shape that finally felt whole, rather than divided. The Ashgrall came back 4 months later, and this time they did not come to raid quietly at the edges of a settlement that had no idea what it was facing. They came in greater numbers, 3 ships instead of 1, and they came having heard, somewhere out along the trade routes that stretched far beyond Alira's gentle sky, a rumor that had begun to travel between raiding crews the way rumors always do among people who hunt soft worlds for a living. A rumor about a small settlement on a peaceful planet where a single defender had turned back an entire raiding party with her bare hands. Some of the raiders, I would learn afterward, had come back specifically to see if the rumor was true. Others had come back to make certain it would never happen again. I was 16 by then, no longer the 13-year-old who had frozen over a bowl of stew wondering why her heart refused to race the way it should. In the 4 months since the first attack, Yara had taken it upon herself, with Marin's careful, worried blessing, to help me understand what I was, rather than simply fear it. We spent long afternoons together, Yara guiding me through slow, deliberate exercises meant to teach me control rather than suppression, meant to help me choose, consciously, when to let the old, patient hunter beneath my skin come forward, and when to keep her gently, firmly, at rest. It had not been easy. There were nights I woke from the dream of fire and my mother's voice with my whole body already tensed for a fight that existed only in memory, and mornings I sat at the kitchen table trying to braid Pell's hair with hands that 4 months earlier had disarmed grown raiders without hesitation, and finding, to my own quiet relief, that those 2 things no longer felt like a contradiction. They felt, increasingly, like 2 instruments in the same steady hand. When the alarm horn sounded again on a clear autumn morning, I did not need Marin to tell me what was coming. I was already standing at the window, watching the tree line at the edge of the eastern ridge, and I felt the old, familiar coldness settle into my chest, quiet and clear, but no longer frightening in the way it had been the first time. This time, I understood exactly what it was for. "They're back," I said to Marin, who had come to stand beside me, her hand finding my shoulder, the way it always did now, before anything dangerous began, a small habit that had grown between us in the months since the first attack, a silent promise passed between us both, without words. "How many?" she asked. "More than before," I said. "I can already tell. Get Dovey and Pell to the deep cellar. I'll find you when it's over." She did not argue this time, the way she had not argued in months, though I could still see, every single time, the flicker of fear behind her eyes, a fear I had come to understand was not fear of me at all, but fear for me, the ordinary terror of any mother watching her child walk toward danger, regardless of how capable that child had become. "Come back to us," she said simply, the same words she said every time now. "I will," I said, and meant it completely. This time, I was not alone in meeting them. In the months since the first attack, the settlement had changed in quiet, careful ways. A small defense group had formed, mostly younger Voss who had watched, that first terrible day, exactly what a gentle world looked like when it had no idea how to protect itself, and had decided, together, that they never wanted to feel that helpless again. They were not soldiers, not truly, not in the way my birth mother would have understood the word, but they had learned, under Yara's patient guidance and my own careful teaching, how to move together, how to use their settlement's terrain, how to trust the sharp, clear warnings I could give them a half-second before their own gentler senses caught up. We met the Ashgrall not at the grain stores this time, where they expected to find frightened families to herd toward the river, but at the tree line itself, where I had learned, over the past 4 months, that the terrain favored quiet movement and patient ambush far more than open confrontation. The fighting that followed was harder than the first attack had been, longer, more desperate, because this time the Ashgrall had come prepared for resistance and brought enough numbers to grind through it. I will not pretend the hours that followed were easy, or that I moved through them without cost. I took a wound along my forearm early on, deep enough that it should have slowed me, and did not, because whatever old conditioning my birth mother had folded into me all those years ago apparently included an ability to set pain quietly aside until there was time, later, to properly feel it. What I remember most clearly from that long, desperate afternoon is not the fighting itself, though there was a great deal of it, but the moment, deep into the battle, when I found myself standing between a fallen young Voss defender, barely older than Dovey, and an Ashgrall raider whose weapon was already rising to finish what the fight had started. I had a choice. In that half-second, the same choice I had faced during the first attack. I could end the threat completely, the way some deep, old part of me knew exactly how to do without hesitation. Or I could choose, as I had chosen before, the harder path, the one that cost me more in the moment but asked less of me afterward. I chose, as I had before, to disarm rather than destroy, catching the raider's weapon arm and turning the full weight of his own charge back against him, dropping him to the ground, stunned but breathing, exactly as I had done 4 months earlier. It was not mercy born of weakness. Every instinct in me understood the other choice was faster, simpler, safer for myself. It was mercy chosen deliberately, the way my birth mother's recording had once told me I would one day get to choose, and every single time I made that choice, I felt something in my chest settle a little further into a shape that finally felt entirely my own. By the time the last Ashgrall ship lifted off the ridge that evening, driven back a second time by a gentle world that had finally learned, however painfully, how to protect itself, the settlement had lost no one, though a great many, myself included, carried wounds that would take time to heal. I found Marin in the deep cellar exactly where I had left her, Dovey and Pell pressed close against her sides, and the moment she saw me standing in the doorway, wounded but upright, she crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled me into her arms so tightly it pulled a small, pained sound from my injured arm that I did not bother to hide. "You came back," she said into my hair, her voice thick. "I told you I would," I said. Dovey, taller now than he had been 4 months earlier, stepped forward, and with a hesitance I had never seen from him before, wrapped his arms carefully around both of us at once. "You're not fragile at all, are you?" he said quietly, the old joke gone entirely from his voice. "You never were." "No," I admitted, resting my head briefly against his shoulder. "I don't think I ever was. I just needed time to understand what I actually was instead." It took the settlement the better part of a season to fully recover from that second attack, though recover, I came to understand, was not quite the right word. The settlement did not simply return to what it had been before. It grew, slowly and carefully, into something a little less soft at the edges, a people who had learned, painfully but permanently, that gentleness and helplessness were not the same thing, and that it was possible to remain kind and open and warm to one another, while still knowing how to stand firm when something hard and dangerous came looking for easy prey. I grew alongside them, in my own way. Yara continued our lessons, though they became, over time, less about control and more about balance, about learning exactly how much of the quiet hunter within me to let forward in any given moment, and how much to set gently, deliberately, aside. Marin never once stopped looking at me, in quiet, unguarded moments, with a small flicker of the same old worry she had carried since I was small, but it had changed shape over the months, evolved from fear of what I might become into something closer to a fierce, protective pride, the pride of a mother who had raised something rare and was determined to help it become good, rather than simply powerful. It was almost a full year after the first attack, on an ordinary, quiet evening much like the one that had begun this whole strange chapter of my life, that I found myself once again sitting by the window with a comb in my lap, working slowly through my own tangled hair, while Pell sat cross-legged on the floor in front of me, watching intently. "Will you teach me the settlement pattern?" Pell asked, holding up her own small comb hopefully. "The one for gratitude. I want to make one for you." I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had disarmed raiders twice now without hesitation, and found, with a small, quiet smile, that somewhere in the past year, without my ever quite noticing it happen, they had finally learned the patient, careful art of braiding after all. "I think I can manage that," I said, and began, slowly and correctly this time, weaving the first careful strands of Pell's hair into the pattern Marin had spent years trying, patiently, to teach me. Dovey wandered in partway through, dropping onto the floor beside his sister with the easy, familiar comfort of a brother who no longer flinched at the strange, quiet strength in my hands, and Marin appeared in the doorway not long after, watching the three of us with an expression I had come to recognize, over the past year, as something close to contentment finally settling fully into place. My homework sheet still sat unfinished on the table behind me, exactly the way it always had, the numbers waiting patiently for an evening when I would eventually get around to them. My braid, when I finally finished Pell's and moved on to my own, came out neat and even for the first time in my life, a small, private victory that meant more to me, in that quiet moment, than anything I had done on the battlefield ever had. I thought, sitting there in the warm evening light with my family gathered close around me, of my birth mother's voice, cracked and tired, and full of a love I would spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of, telling me, all those years ago, that she hoped, more than anything, that I would get the chance to choose who I wanted to be. I understood now, in a way I had not been able to on the day I first heard that recording, exactly what she had meant. I was not only the fragile foster child who forgot her homework and struggled with her braids, the one everyone had spent years gently protecting without ever fully understanding what she truly was. And I was not only the quiet, patient hunter beneath that surface, the one born of a hard, unforgiving world, built by a mother's desperate love to survive things gentler children never should have had to imagine. I was both of those people, at exactly the same time, and I had finally, after everything, learned how to be. The Ashgral did not return again that year, or the year after, and I have come to understand, since then, that word travels along the dangerous edges of the sky the same way it travels everywhere else. Raiders looking for soft, undefended worlds learned, eventually, to look elsewhere, because Illyria, however gentle it remained at its heart, was no longer an easy place to hunt. I like to think, on quiet evenings when I sit by that same river window, that somewhere among the stars my birth mother once looked up at, from a burning, broken world, she would be glad to know exactly how her daughter turned out. Not a weapon, exactly, though I have certainly been that when I needed to be. Not only a gentle, ordinary girl either, though I have been that too, every single day, in every small and unremarkable way that matters. Simply this: a daughter of two mothers and two worlds who learned, in the end, to carry both of them at once, with steady hands that could finish a homework sheet, weave a careful braid, and when the day ever demanded it, stand quietly and completely between the people she loved and whatever came looking to take them from her. That, I have come to believe, is exactly what she was hoping for when she sent me here.